Hello all, this is Scott Moore. I'm one of the Senior Technical Account Managers supporting Hewlett-Packard Enterprise within Ingram Micro. And in this video, I'm going to go over some of the basics of OCA, or One Config Advanced. This is HPE's tool for building CTO configurations. So to start off, there are two ways to get into OCA. It lies within HPE's partner portal, and you can use the link shown here at the top of the screen to access that. If you've logged into the partner portal within the past 7 days, you can use the second link listed as the workaround link. That will get you directly into OCA without having to log into the partner portal first, but you must have logged into the partner portal within the past week in order for that link to work. On occasion, if OCA seems to be down and not functional within the partner portal, you can use that workaround link, and sometimes that will still work. So it's kind of a backup in case the partner portal is not functioning. So let's head over to the Ingram Micro partner portal and log in. And once I'm in, I have One Config Advanced set up as a bookmark on my homepage under Top Tools. But if you need to access it, if you don't have it already set up, you can go to the little wrench on the left for Tools. And by clicking on that, it should bring you up a search bar where you can look through HPE's various tools by type in One Config Advanced. It should bring that right up for me. And there it is. And you had the little green pin if you want to pin that tool so that it's always visible for you when you log into the partner portal. Once I click on it, it takes a couple seconds to load. And once it's up, there's a bunch of stuff on the screen. I'm going to walk through a lot of it kind of piece by piece, but let's start in the upper right with that little icon that looks like a person. If I go there, I can manage my profile preferences, which lets me set things like my region, country, my preferred language. The voltage I want as the standard assumption when I build things. And I usually want it to assume 220 volts for a data center. I can always change that to 110 later if I want. The product life cycle, and this will show you products from each of those different periods in a product's life, depending on what you have selected. I have all three selected: obsolete, discontinued, and pre-release, because I use OCA not just for configuration, but I also use it as a reference tool to get information on specific parts. If you are not a distributor, you won't see the one that says pre-release. You should only have the options for obsolete and discontinued. If you are building products for sale regularly, you might want to have obsolete and discontinued not selected so that those products don't come up for you when you're trying to build something. Again, I have them checked here just because I use OCA as a reference tool, not only for current products, but for forthcoming and for previous products as well. On the right side, under Hardware Catalog Filter, you have the option of BTO, CTO, or both. And again, I usually select both because I'm using OCA as a reference tool and I'm looking up the configuration of BTO products, or I might be building a CTO configuration in there. If you want to make sure you're only seeing CTO products, select CTO. The reason you might want to do that is OCA is a configuration tool specifically for CTO products. Although you can look up BTO products such as pre-built ProLiant servers in there, you don't want to purchase, build, or order BTO products through OCA. For BTO products, HPE has a separate tool called iQuote, and Ingram Micro does offer separate trainings on iQuote for building BTO solutions if that's something that interests you. But I have it set to both, and I just have to know to ignore BTO products when they're offered to me. They are designated when products come up. If you do a search, there'll be a tag on it that indicates whether it's BTO or CTO. Workgroup settings, the number listed here is your default save workgroup that should be unique to your company. At the very bottom, there's a section for additional options. And I'll leave this up here for a second so you can always refer back to it in the video if you like. Once you see the way I have the output designated for myself, if there's a feature in there that you like, you can see if it's something I have turned on or something I have turned off. You can see what my makeup is here for my output through OCA if there's things that you like. I like to show the price. I want to see the list price for all the products that I'm building just for reference. I want to see the dates around lead times, how long it's going to take to come in to HP's warehouse. I want to know when things are going to go obsolete, when things are going to go discontinued, so I have all those on. You have the option of showing the lead time in a date range. So it will tell you if it's a short, medium, long, or extended ETA. A short ETA may be anywhere from 1 to 14 days, for example. If you have numeric estimated availability lead time on, rather than give you a date range, it gives you a number for the current amount of days it expects to wait before that product will be in HP's warehouse. So rather than saying it's a short wait time, it will tell you it's a 4-day wait time. Mainstream I have on as well, but it's something I usually turn off in a config, or I should say I frequently turn off in a config, because I can adjust that one while I'm actually building something. Mainstream will show you the options that HPE is going to have more readily available and that they consider more popular options. All the options for a particular product that you're building may not be displayed if you have mainstream on, but in the middle of a configuration, you can very easily turn it off, and I'll show you where to do that so that all the options can be displayed. The nice thing about it is if you want to pull up or add to a configuration, only the options that HPE says are going to be the most popular, the most readily available, and have the longest lifetimes. If you leave mainstream checked, it will just show you those products. But if you're looking for, let's say, a specific capacity SSD drive for a server, and you don't see it listed in the options, you might have to turn mainstream off in order to show all the options available for that server. So I'm going to scroll up, step out of here for a second, and let's talk about configuration delegation. On the configuration delegation screen, I can type in the config ID, which is just a numerical identifier that is unique to a specific configuration. I can type in the UCID of someone else's configuration, not at Ingram Micro, and bring that up. Now, I can't do that automatically. The person who creates the configuration has to delegate it to Ingram Micro. Once it's been delegated to Ingram Micro, we can open the configuration and see it. The benefit of that is if you build a configuration for a storage system, for a server, for a data center, etc., and you want to get it priced as it is and get a quote on it, if you delegate that configuration to Ingram Micro, we can bring up your config and put a price on it. If you don't do that, the config would have to be recreated from scratch because we don't have access to any other company's configurations unless they delegate them to us. Another option would be to save your configuration local, and you can send us the .oca file that is saved locally to your system when you choose to save local. We can also work with that, but delegation is kind of the easy, straightforward, and simple way to do it. And I will show you how to do that when we go to build a configuration as well. So I'm going to go over here to new configuration. You'll see that I have 5 options available. Typically, I'm going to choose the one that says normal. And that's going to give me the ability to configure servers, switches, storage, pretty much everything HPE offers. If I'm doing a GreenLake solution, a GreenLake Select solution, I can't build it under normal and then change it over to GreenLake. I have to start by doing GreenLake Select solutions and choosing that from the menu. For those who purchase remanufactured HPE products, you can choose the Renew option, and it will build a configuration out of Renew parts. Building a Renew configuration does not mean HPE actually has those parts in stock in remanufactured or renewed condition. So that is something you'd have to check separately. Add-ons and upgrades, if I already have an existing system, but I need to buy some accessories for it through the CTO process, I can do that by choosing add-ons and upgrades. It lets me choose the base system to which I want the options to apply. I can add the options and it will quote the options, but not the base system. And then support only. For those end users who have already purchased HPE products, and then after the purchase realize they want to upgrade the warranty, so they need to purchase not the hardware, but just the support that goes along with it. You can do a support only build, and similar to the add-ons and upgrades, you select which device the warranty is going to be for. You select the terms of the warranty, and the quote will have the additional warranty, but it won't have the base system on it, since that's already been purchased by the end user. So I'm going to go ahead and choose normal. And there's a couple things in this screen that you might want to at least check the first time you go in. Make sure your region and your country are correct. Make sure your input voltage is what you want it to be for this configuration. You can always click and change that if you want. You can give the configuration a name here if you wish. You can also give it a name at the point you save it, so it's not critical to do that right now. You'll see that obsolete, discontinued, and pre-release are all checked. I can uncheck those if I want to make options go away. Same thing with BTO, CTO, and both. If I want to change that, I can choose just CTO, and it will show me only CTO options. Right now, I'm going to leave it as both. And let me type in TL380 Gen 10 and look at all the options we get. So you'll see the green BTO flag, and there should be CTO options as well, but there's so many BTO options it pretty much fills up the screen there. The OBS flag means that model has gone obsolete. So in this case, by searching on DL380 Gen 10, there's the indication that there's a ton of options here because I'm looking at all the BTO, all the CTO, and I'm looking at all the obsolete, discontinued, pre-release products. So let's choose to not look at the obsolete, the discontinued, and look at only the CTO options and run that check again. DL380, Gen 10. And you see I have the orange CTO flag and all the parts that come up. None of them have that green OBS or obsolete flag. So these are the options I can choose for my base system. Gen 10, 8 small form factor configure to order server. That's a pretty standard model to begin with. So I'm going to select that one. You'll see I get a new option up here that says integrate in. And this is because I selected a DL series server, which is rack mount. I have the option of selecting the rack I want it to be configured in. Now, if I don't want a rack, I can leave it set to standalone. But if I do need to purchase a rack with a server, I can select the rack I need from here. So let's grab this kitted shock rack just to have one on the configuration. Then I hit the green button that says create, and it will think for a little bit, and it will do a partial configuration and then present me with a bunch of options to choose. So on this screen, you can see I have a menu for processor, memory, storage, factory configuration, settings, etc. If there is a green dot next to it, it means that that section is complete, nothing is needed, I can still go into that section and change something if I want to, but it's not necessary. If there is a yellow triangle, I might have to change something depending on other selections I make in the configuration. It might be that currently it's good the way it is, but it might be missing something. Maybe there isn't a standard default NICs selected, or maybe there isn't an array controller selected, and maybe I don't need one. But it's just to draw my attention to the fact that you might want to look at the section and see if there's something to change. Where there's a red diamond, that means I have to make some sort of selection. So the base CTO configuration, if you've done CTO before, you know it's really just an empty chassis with a motherboard. It has no processor, it has no memory, it has no power supplies. Those are added separately. And given that information, you look at processor, memory, and power and cooling, and you'll see those three categories all have red diamonds on them, meaning I have to select something here for this to be a viable system. So there's two ways to get to the list of processors. I can either click on where it says processor, which will then turn that button green and open up the menu to show me all the processor options available. Or if I click it again, it turns white again and those disappear. I can also click on the name below. If I click on processor here, it opens up and shows me that same menu, and it turns the processor button on top green. So I can scroll through here and I can find the specific processor I'm looking for. Let's see, I see here a bunch of silver and gold processors. I know, or at least I'm pretty sure, that HPE offers platinum processors on this as well, but I don't see them listed here. That's probably because I have this show only mainstream products on. I bet if I turn this off, I will have some platinum processors appear. And there they are. However, these happen to be listed as obsolete, and that's because I selected a Gen 10. The X100 series processors have been obsoleted by Intel. There should be some X200 series around as well. And let's see, here we go. Let's grab an 8260. So I go over to the little selector for the quantity. I click on it and it changes the quantity from 0 to 1. Now, the quantity selection button will vary depending on the type of product you're adding. If it's something where I can have 0 or 1, such as the primary processor, if it's on 0 and I click it, it changes it to 1. If it's on 1 and I click it, it changes it to 0. If it was something like memory modules I can have, say, 1 to 24 in a system. When I click on that, it will let me just type in the box how many I want. If it's something where there is a broad range, but not as broad as 1 to 24, say hard drives. I have an 8-bay cage on here. When I go to selected drives, it might actually give me a drop down with the choices of 0 through 8, and I can just select the number of drives I want. So there's 3 different ways to enter quantities for the individual products within a configuration, and it's going to vary depending on the type of product that you're adding. Like I said, it could be either a toggle, 0 or 1. It could be a selected quantity from a short list, or it could be type in the total quantity of what you want. So this added the first platinum processor. I would like to add a second processor to the server. If I go down here to additional processors, it only gives me one option. It gives me the option to match the processor I've already selected. So let me do that. And you'll see each product on here also lists the estimated lead time. So 4 days on these processors. I can get a good idea of what might hold up a configuration by looking at those lead times. Here, the gold processors right now just seem to have a longer lead time than the platinum processor I selected. So I've selected my 2 processors. I should be good there. Let's look at memory. When I do that, when I click out of the processor section, you see the processor is now has the green dot next to it, meaning that I've completed everything in that section to make it a viable configuration. So let's look at the memory, and let's say I'm going to add 4 32 meg modules. And here when I select the quantity, I have to type it in because it doesn't want to give me a drop-down list with 24 options to choose from. So I could just type in the quantity. And let's also go to the power and cooling and close the memory section. Again, when I close the memory section, since I've added memory, that's all green and good to go. I go to the power and cooling section. Let me grab 2 of the 800-watt power supplies. And here's the short list of drop-down selections when you have something where it's a relatively small quantity to choose from. I'm going to grab 2 so I have some redundancy there. Let's look at the networking section. In the networking section, I have my CNAs to choose from. I have flexible LAM CNAs. I have Ethernet flexible LAMs, Ethernet PCIe. So all the NICs are broken down into separate categories. If there's a default, you'll see it selected here. There isn't one, so I'm going to grab, let's see, a 1025 2-port FLR NIC. That sounds good. So it will change that quantity to 1. I will point out too that there's a little green circle with a white check on each SKU that is a mainstream product. So even if you have mainstream off in the upper right, you can still tell which options are mainstream options. And even within the mainstream options, it will tell you which are the HPE preferred, which is the HPE recommended option of all those that are mainstream. So I've done the basic things that go into a server. I've touched the processor, I've touched the memory, I've touched the networking, I've touched the power and cooling. I haven't added any storage yet, but just for the heck of it, let's check out this configuration, see if there's any errors at this point. In the upper left, you'll see here's the name of my configuration. Remember, I didn't change it on the title screen. The default was OCA config 3. And it will tell you that within OCA config 3, I'm in the first rack, and within that first rack, I'm in the DL380. If I want to check this configuration for errors or check the list of parts that go into the configuration, I want to make sure I'm at the top of the configuration. So I'm going to click on OCA config 3. And it will show me, here's OCA config 3. It contains a rack. It contains a DL380. You know what? Actually, I want 2 DL380s. So the quick, easy way to add a second one, if I want to have multiple servers of the same type deployed, once I built that first server, I just come over here and change that quantity to a 2. And now there's 2 DL380s. So let's look at the bill of materials by clicking on BOM on the left. And this will give me the total list of parts. You'll see it starts with the rack, some of the rack accessories, then it goes to 2 of the DL380 base configurations. Gives me all the parts that make up the DL380, and then it tacks on services at the very end. You'll see that it adds on HPE training credits. That's pretty standard for HPE servers, that they always add on training credits. I will show you where to take those off because most people prefer not to get those. Also, the warranty it recommended was 5 years Tech Care Essential. Maybe you don't want 5 years, you want 3 years. Maybe you don't want installation on it as well. I'll show you how to take those things off as well. But while we're in here, we can also check the lead time on everything. It looks like we have fairly decent lead times for this configuration. Everything should have a 4-day wait to get it into HPE's warehouse, which isn't too bad. But on this BOM screen, in addition to giving me the list of parts, it also gives me a button that says CLIC Check. Now, if I was anywhere further down the configuration, remember it said OCA config 3 here, then it had the rack, then it had the server. If I was on the rack or I was on the server, I wouldn't have this click button. This click button only shows up at the top of the total configuration. If I click this, it will do an error check and see if there's anything in this configuration that's going to cause a problem. Usually what it gives you are a bunch of What it says are errors or warnings. Errors and warnings you can really ignore for the most part. You can read them and see what they tell you. Usually it's something like, hey, you want to make sure you add storage, or hey, we recommend at least a 3-year warranty. So it's not a big deal. If there's anything that says unbuildable, those will be in red, and HPE will not accept the order if it has unbuildables on it. So you have to try to eliminate those. So in this case, I have no errors, so that's a good thing. Let's go back and let's talk about those services. So it's given me installation for the rack, installation and startup services for the servers, and it's given me 5-year tech care essentials on everything. Maybe that's not the level of support I want. So let's go to the services tab. And on this screen, I can scroll down, and anything that has a pencil on it, it will let me edit that line. So this pencil is on the rack. This pencil, the upper one, is on the DL380. I'm going to click that one, because that's what I want to set my services on. And it should bring me up a screen of services specific to the DL380. It tells me that I have installation HA114A1 selected, and then I have 5-year tech care, but I want to select my own services. So once I click that, I get a whole bunch of options. Maybe I don't want the installation, so I can take that off. Maybe I don't want 5-year tech care essentials. Maybe I want 3-year tech care essentials. But maybe I want that with defective media retention, so that I get to keep any drives that are failed and don't have to trade them back in for new drives. Maybe the data on them is going to be sensitive. I select my new levels of support, my new level of installation, and I can come over and click OK here. But before I do, if you read that short sentence right above it, with that checkbox selected, it will apply the displayed install level and support level to all nodes within the solution. Typically, that's what you want. So you want that box checked. And I say typically because usually if you're getting multiple servers, switches, storage systems on one configuration, you want them to all have the same level of support. So rather than have to go into each device and change it individually, if you select that checkbox or make sure it's checked, it will do it for all the products in your configuration. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to leave that checked, hit OK. Now, before I go back and look at the BOM again, I'm going to look at other services summary, because this should tell me everything that's not an installation service and not a warranty upgrade. Like those training credits. Here's those 2 training credits. I really don't want them. So I'm going to hit the little trash can and I'm going to get rid of them. And they should disappear from this screen. If I go back up to bill of materials, make sure I'm at the top level. And if we scroll to the bottom, we'll notice the installation services are gone. I now have 3-year tech care with DMR for the servers, so I'm in good shape. You notice too that the servers are quantity 2 because back at the component screen, I changed the quantity on the servers to 2. Let's say after I build this, I say, you know what? I don't want those servers mounted in the rack after all. I can take the servers out of the rack by simply grabbing the servers and moving them up a level. Click and drag them on top of OCA config 3. And you'll see instead of the server being indented underneath the rack, it's now on the same level as the rack. If I go back to my bill of materials, here's my rack. And you'll see it changes the color to gray for the servers because the servers are now a separate configuration. They're not something that's configured in the rack. You'll also notice that the server itself does not have the OD1 listed on it like it did previously, meaning that it's something to be installed in a larger component. Such as if you look at the processor here, there's an OD1. If you look at the memory kit, there's an OD1, meaning this component is factory integrated in a larger system. In this case, the DL380 base system. So just to show you, we've got the base part number for the servers, and we have the ABA code. which means it's for the United States. If I go back to components and I said, you know what? I do want that in the rack. I can drag and drop it to the rack. It becomes indented under the rack. And if I go to the BOM again, you'll see there's no differentiation in color between the servers and the rack because they are integrated as one device. And you'll see that the server, in addition to having the standard part number with ABA, meaning the United States version, the OD1, meaning this component is integrated into a larger product, the rack, is also back. When I go to save this configuration, you can click on Save in the upper right, and I have two options. I can save OCA config 3, which is the default name that it was given when I created it. At this point, if I do that, I can change the name, or I can save it to local. So let's do both of those. If I want to do a save to local, I have to do a save OCA config 3 anyway. I have to do a regular save before I can do a save to local. So here's my save screen. Here's where I can change the name, and it's already highlighted for me to do so. So let's call this a server demo. There's an original name. It's going to save it to my default work group, which remember I showed you on the profile screen. You can find out what your default work group is. I have the option of having this private, shared read only, or shared editable. The option you always want to select is shared editable. And this should be able to be set under your profile preferences as well. This means that the configurations you build, other people can see them should you choose to share them with them. And they can also make modifications to the configuration if you give them permission to do so. So this allows you to delegate, this allows you to save local and then send your OCA files to a distributor for pricing. Or if you decide, hey, I want to change the quantity on the server, or I want to add a different network card option, your distributor partner can make those changes for you as long as everything is shared editable. If it's not shared editable, we can't see it. So we can't change it, we can't critique it, we can't price it, etc. Once I hit save, in the upper left, I get a UCID number. And if you try to highlight this number, you'll find you have a very difficult time doing so without the space. If you click on UCID, it highlights the number for you. So you can right click it and copy. That number is a unique identifier for this configuration. That long string of digits that starts with 5 at the beginning of it, that is unique to this configuration and any versions of this configuration. The last 2 digits, the -01, tell you which revision of this configuration it is. So let's say 5133.17.6610-01, I built 2 servers inside the rack. And then I say, you know what? I actually don't want the servers in the rack. I'm going to take those out, move them to the top level of the configuration. So now the servers are on the same level as the rack. If I go back to the BOM, I have the configuration for the rack. I have a separate configuration for the 2 servers. That's what I actually wanted. So now I can save this as a revision, a new version. And for version comments, I can say removed servers from rack. Don't have to put anything there, but it can be useful when you load an old configuration to see what it is. So I'll hit save. You'll notice the number will remain the same, the master number here, but the version never changed. I'm now on the -02 of the configuration. Let's say this is the one that I want to send to my distributor to get priced. So then I can either delegate it, or I can do a save to local. And if I do this, it will save a .oca file to my local drive, and I could send that OCA file You'll see it down in the lower left here, it's mentioned. I can send that OCA file off to a distributor. They can access it, they can price the configuration. We can edit the configuration if you need us to make modifications to it or add products or remove options, etc. If I want to do a configuration for a completely different opportunity, but the solution is going to be similar to this one, I can use this one as a starting point for a completely unrelated opportunity by opening this configuration, which I already have it open here. And let's do a save as a new configuration. And you'll see the beginning number. Let's call this server demo for customer 2. You'll see the beginning number changed, as did the version number at the end. If you save it as a new configuration, the new configuration will always start as a -01 because it's the first version of the new configuration. But this starting sequence also changed because I told it this was going to be part of a new configuration. I can make any modifications I want here and save it, and it won't impact the previous configuration that I built, that I essentially copied this from. Let me see. New delegation. Let me go back over to the upper left. I'm going to click on UCD and I'm going to copy that UCID number just so I have it in my buffer. If I wanted to share this, if I as a reseller want to share this with a distributor, I can click new delegation. I can select who I want to delegate this configuration to. The group I set will be the only group besides my company that can see this configuration. As you can see, there are going to be a ton of options in here to choose from. I assure you Ingram Micro is somewhere way down that list, but there's an easier way to do it rather than enter that every time. Normally what I would do is make sure the delegator target ID is correct in that field. Make sure you check the name and the number if it looks good. If I hit delegate, a copy of that UCID is now available to the distributor I've decided to delegate it to. You can send them an email and say, hey, I've delegated this UCID to you, 511, etc. Can you just give me a price on it? And that's all the information we'll need to know. Well, we'll need your deal reg number as well. That's going to be important. But I'm going to back out of this delegation for a second, and I'm going to show you how to make that selection list hopefully a little bit easier. If you go to the upper right, go back to profile preferences. Down here under work group settings, there is a default delegation work group. If you go through here and you select if there's one distributor you deal with regularly, hopefully it's Ingram Micro. If you go through this list once and select Ingram Micro's delegation ID, that will be the default when you go to share a delegation. So you don't have to search through that list and pick out Ingram Micro's ID. It will be your default value. Even if if you do deal with multiple distributors, if you select the delegation ID for the distributor you work with most frequently, it will save you a lot of time and energy in searching through that list if you set a default delegation ID. This does not mean that anything you built automatically gets delegated to that distributor. It just means that when you do delegate, that will be the default account listed. There was some misunderstanding. We have had resellers who said, gee, I have you selected as the default delegation work group. You should have a copy of all my stuff. No, we don't automatically get a copy of it. If you set default delegation work group, that means we will be the one who comes up by default when you choose to delegate something. It doesn't automatically delegate on your behalf. So back to the configuration here. Let me see. We talked about, and I will show you Ingram Micro's delegation idea was on that initial slide that I put up at the start. I'll put that up at the end of the presentation as well, so you have it for reference. So we talked about logging into OCA from the partner portal. We talked about the alternative login to OCA. We talked a little bit about delegation, showed how to build a device, add or remove from a rack. We talked about saving. Saving is a new version, saving is a new configuration, saving to local to get a .oca file, and we talked about doing new delegations. Let's also look at export, and I wish I had a file handy. I forgot to have an Excel file handy for this. Or I'm sorry, not export, I want import. Import, one of the options is import BOM to create OCA configuration. If I select that, it will let me browse my local drive or any attached network volume in looking for an Excel spreadsheet. I can have an Excel spreadsheet with the first column containing the quantities of all the parts of my configuration, and the second column containing the part numbers for each item in my configuration. And that's all I need. A lot of times the third column, people will put it in the description of the part number, but it's not necessarily. The only thing you need in the Excel file is the first column being the quantity for each part that's listed in column 2. With just the quantities and the part numbers, I can load an Excel file and OCA will build the configuration for me just based on those parts. I may have to do some additional modification if there's a part that OCA is not quite sure how to add into the configuration, but it will give you messages on that. Let me see. I'm going to try to load a config just for the heck of it. Yes, and so this was an Excel spreadsheet of just a list of parts that we're going to use for a configuration in-house. It went through the file, it found the quantities and the part numbers, and it put up the description for each. I can scroll through this list to verify, yeah, it looks correct. And at the very bottom, I have a preview import. Preview import will let you look at the configuration in a different format before it essentially loads it. Now, I was working on another configuration. I'm going to abandon that other configuration and move over to this. But since that last configuration was saved, there weren't any changes, so it didn't ask me if I wanted to quit or anything like that because I had already made the changes. So here's everything that was in that Excel file. And it gives me a check mark to say, yes, we've imported that, okay. It gives me a plus when it's added something during the translation from Excel to OCA. And it looks like it added installation and warranty upgrade by default. And it also tells me that this part number, the little green ticket that says ADH, tells me that product is ad hoc, which means it's not installed to the configuration, it's just thrown on as an extra piece. And we'll talk about that in a little bit as well. But with the other check marks I have here, everything else looks good. It will give you some additional messages on things when it's important. For example, apparently a few items on this old configuration, and I can tell this one's an 8160, were listed as obsolete. So the obsolete products will not be quoted. But let's go ahead and complete the import. And you can see, just like the previous configuration, I had 2 products in there. I had a rack and I had the DL380. Here I have a DL380 and I have an ad hoc container. The ad hoc container contains some additional P40 GPUs that aren't installed in the system. If I go back up, all I see is the ad hoc container. The server's disappeared, but that's because I'm not on the top of the configuration. If I click on the top of the configuration, there they are. So let's check the bill of materials on this one for just a second. So this is for quantity 2 DL380 servers. And at the very bottom, here's the ad hoc GPUs. And you'll see there isn't an OD1 or anything on these because they're not installed in the system. They're just kind of extra items thrown in. And that's also why they're in gray. They're not part of the previous configuration, which is for the DL300 servers. They are their own configuration, essentially. Looking at the ETAs on things over here, we can see that most of these are going to be in the config center within 4 days. There's a couple that are 2 weeks out, and those have the yellow flags on them. So if it's something that could easily be changed out, and not really, maybe it's an opportunity to go in and change that option to something that's more readily available. So let's look at the BOM on this. I will do a CLIC check. And here's what I was talking about with those unbuildable errors. So the text of the unbuildable errors over here will tell you exactly what needs to be done. When ordering the ProLiant with RAID 1, you've got to have at least 2 hard drives. Makes sense. When ordering the server, you've got to have a minimum of 1 and a maximum of 2 processors. Also makes sense. We were told that those processors wouldn't be quoted because the ones we selected were discontinued. But this will go through, same thing, memory options. This will go through and tell you what's wrong with the configuration and what you need to do to remove these unbuildable errors. So that CLIC check is something you should always do when you think you're done with the configuration. Before you send it off to be priced or quoted or worked on in any way by your distributor partner, the last thing you want to do is run CLIC and make sure all those unbuildables are gone. If you send us a file with unbuildables, we really can't do anything with it because the product is not sellable by HPE. Now, there are a few issues where an unbuildable will say, hey, for this product, you need a certain approval, or you need a like a fan override, a factory approval number override for this to go through. Those unbuildables are okay because we can deal with those on our side. But things like this where it says, hey, you haven't selected a processor. Hey, you haven't selected hard drives and you said you want a RAID 1. That's something you need to fix on your side before you send it over to us. So we'll say we're done with the configuration there. Let's also talk about adding to the configuration. So this has a couple servers on it. Let's say I want to add some switches to it. So I'm going to, in the upper right, add a product from the catalog. And let's see if I can find the Mellanox switches. There we go. I'm going to grab a couple Mellanox switches and throw them in there. Add that one on. I can go in here and add any specific cables or transceivers to the device that I want with it. In whatever quantities I want. Let's go back to BOM. If I go to BOM, I see just the switch and nothing else because that's, I'm not at the top of the configuration. So if I click on the top of the config, I have my 2 servers, and then I will get the color change to indicate here's a separate configuration, and there's my switch, and then my services and my GPUs at the bottom. Now, actually, I want 2 switches. So let me go to components. And just like I did before, I'm going to go on to that switch. I'm going to change that to quantity 2. If I go back to the bill of materials, there's my 2 servers. And down here, here's my 2 switches. Now, you know what? That SN2010M, as I remember, is a half rack wide switch. So I can mount 2 of those next to each other in a rack. So if I want to rack mount those, I really only need a single rack mount kit. Let me go in there and look. Let's see accessories. Rack installation kit, it is not selected, and it says each Q2F25A rack kit can support 2 switches. So you need 1 rack mount kit for each pair of switches. Well, I don't want to say if I add 1 here, because I have 2 switches, I'm going to get 2 rack mount kits. I don't want that. I just want 1 rack mount kit for the 2 servers. So there's a couple ways I can do that actually. If I go back to components, go to switches, and go to the accessories, I can change that to 0. So now I have no rack mount kits. And I could drop that into that ad hoc container. Again, this is extra parts that aren't going to be on the config. So if I drop that in there, that's the wrong part number. Let's try that again. There's the correct part number. If I go to BOM, because it's ad hoc, I just have 1 rack mount kit on there. Now there's another way to do it as well. I can go back to components. So the ad hoc container, essentially the quantities you put in the ad hoc container are the quantities that will be attached to your configuration. So even though the configuration is doubled because I want 2 switches, the ad hoc container is not part of the switch configuration since I threw it in the ad hoc container. So it only gives me quantity 1. The other way to do that, let's go back into the switch. We'll go back into ad hoc. I will copy this part number and I will take it off. I will take it off the config by changing the quantity to 0. Go back to the component screen. I still have my 2 switches. I can click on these 3 dots, the ellipsis to the right of the name, and I can choose to break out part of the config. So I'm going to break out one of the switches. So instead of quantity 2 switches, I will have the switch listed twice. Each is quantity 1. I can then go into just one of those 2 switches and add that rack mount kit. I go to the top of the configuration again and do the bill of materials. Here's my 2 servers. Here's my 1 switch with a rack mount kit. And here's my 2nd switch below it without the rack mount kit. Let's see, we talked a little bit about the lead times as well. We talked about adding products from the catalog. We talked about making sure when you do a CLIC check on the bill of materials to make sure you're at the top of the configuration, like I am here. We've added products by doing the add product button in the upper right. Let's talk about this customer intent document. This is probably a good configuration. RAID 1 drive FIO setting. Let's go into the server and play around with the server a little bit. I'm going to go into the storage section and I'm going to give it 3 hard drives. There we go. Let's go with, well, this is unquoted. Quoted and unquoted, you'll see there's 2 selections here. The unquoted is the 2 hard drives that were originally in the Excel file when we imported it, but now, because they're obsolete, as shown by the red OB flag on the left, they are not quoted as part of the configuration, but it brought them in as non-quoted parts. So they're still in here for reference. I can change that to 0. I'm going to grab another part here, and let's say I'm going to give me two 480 drives, which I'm going to use for RAID 1 for my operating system. And I'm also going to grab 3 960 drives, which I'm going to set in a RAID 5 for my applications and data. So I'll have a total of 5 hard drives in this server. There we go, good. But somewhere up here, I had the option for RAID 1. RAID 1 doesn't make sense if I have 5 hard drives, which is an odd number, and the capacity of the drives don't even match. So I'm going to take that option off. I would still like RAID on here, but I want to do something fancy. I'd like HPE to set up a RAID for the 2 hard drives in a mirror so I can put my OS on them. And I'd like the other 3 drives for my applications and data to be set up in a RAID 5. If I go back to BOM at the top level, I'm going to run CLIC one more time just to show you our unbuildable messages should have changed. And we had, I believe, 5 before. We only have 4 now. And that's because you'll notice the note about the hard drives is gone because I had RAID selected and no hard drives, so I got an unbuildable error. Here, because I took off the RAID level and I added hard drives, that error has gone away. Let's see some of the other stuff here we can fix while we're at it. Let's go back to components on the server. Let's select processors for it. Let's select memory for it. Let's see, that is a unquoted processor because it was obsolete. So let's look at options that are still around. Let's go with 4216. Sure, that'll be our processor. The additional processor was also an 8160, so we're going to take off the unquoted option there. And let's see. Did not mean to click that. I'll put that back on once we get it. There we go. 4216 processor. When I get down here, I will select the second 4216. Yep. It won't let me select it. Why won't it let me select it? Oh, probably because of the memory. This is memory for the old X100 series processors. I have to take this off and add memory for the X200 series processors, since I just grabbed a 4200 series processor. So let's look at the 2933 memory. I'll put in 8 sticks of memory. That'll work. And if I go back to processor, let me see if it will let me add a second CPU. It does. Now under additional processors, the extra 4216 comes up. If I select that, I'll change the quantity to 1. Now I have 2 processors and appropriate memory in there. Let's go back to BOM once again. Run CLIC. And you'll see now my unbuildables went from 5 to 4 to 2 because I've dealt with the Hard drives, I've dealt with the memory and I've dealt with the processor unbuildables. So this is a note about a power cable that needs to be selected, and the GPU needs to be selected for it. And this is for an obsolete flag on this particular part, Q0480A. So I want to take that part off and find its replacement and use that as well. This one up here, since the configuration has been selected with the appropriate power cable for a GPU, it's telling me I need to add the GPU. I could probably take that GPU off the ad hoc list, find it in the list of GPUs for the server and add it, and that would get rid of that unbuildable error. But what I really wanted to show was on these two servers, if I go back to components, go back to the storage on here, or actually, I'm going to go to I forget if it's under storage or factory configuration settings. Let's look. Remember, I selected 5 hard drives of 2 different capacities because I want to do 2 different RAID levels. RAID level 1 for my operating system, RAID level 5 for my data. So I can come down here. Here it is, RAID settings. I can only pick one of these. Well, I really want a RAID 1 and a RAID 5. So I'm not going to try to select 2 options here. I'm going to select customer defined RAID setting, quantity 1. Now, if I go to the top of the configuration, I go to BOM, I run CLIC Check. I should get a message telling me, and this is just an error. So the configuration, apart from those 2 unbuildables, I haven't done anything that's broken the configuration, but it's telling me I really should have a customer intent document, because with 5 hard drives of 2 different sizes, and I say, yeah, I want something special done with the RAID, I have to tell them what special thing I want done with the RAID. So how to set up a customer intent document. On the server, and this is a time you don't want to be at the top of the configuration because this is going to apply specifically to the server. So in this case, I want to go into the server itself and go over to customer intent. When I click on customer intent, it already has a default menu for me based on the options I selected that require a customer intent document. So in this case, for the RAID settings, I need to explain what I want done. 2 small capacity drives in RAID 1 or OS. The 3 larger drives in a RAID 5 for apps and data. And that's enough to explain what you want done for customer RAID setting. I should go back to top level of the BOM at this point, and let's save this as a new configuration as well. And because there's errors on this configuration that I haven't, unbuildable errors that I haven't fixed yet, I have to acknowledge the fact that I know there's errors on here and this is not a valid configuration at this point. And I can hit save. Factory Express must be selected to be able to save with CI. And did I not select? I might not have saved the customer intent information when I was in there. Oh, additional information to fill out. That's why. So yes, after I've gone in, I put the customer intent information there. I should fill out information on the contact and other information on here. I'm not going to do that right now, but yes, go back and check the customer intent. You can edit anything by clicking on the pencil here. Let's see. Let's actually go to a new configuration, because I also want to mention those ad hoc containers that showed up while we were building configurations. You can build just an ad hoc container for a list of random parts. And this would be where you have to buy something CTO as an option, but you're adding it to another configuration. Let's see. So OCA is currently having a problem, which is great when you're trying to record a training on it. But in this ad hoc container, I can type in part numbers and it will bring up just that part number and description. So it's something that's not part of a configuration. There are hardware ad hoc containers. There are software ad hoc containers. The reason you would use a software ad hoc container, think if you're ordering several servers that are each going to have VMware on them. So you add VMware to each of the servers, change the server quantity to say 10. You have 10 servers, each with its own copy of the VMware, but you also want vCenter, and you don't need 10 copies of vCenter, you only need one. So adding a software ad hoc container, I can drop vCenter into that software ad hoc container, and it will give me quantity 10 of the servers and their VMware software, but only one of the vCenter for managing everything. Actually, I think that pretty much brings us to the end of everything I wanted to walk through. Just going to double check and make sure there isn't anything I'm missing here. We talked about mainstream, we talked about ad hoc containers, we talked about the hierarchy up here and always making sure you're at the top of the configuration when you're running CLIC, or you have to be there in order to run CLIC. Making sure you do a CLIC check before you send the configuration off to be priced or anything like that, so you're aware if there's any errors. We talked about breaking quantities out. So if I have 10 servers, but I want one configured slightly different, remember I can do a right click on the ellipsis next to the name of the product on the component screen, and I can break out a certain quantity from that. Oh, something else I should mention, I think. Unfortunately, OCA is, looks like OCA has gone down while we're working. So I'm going to end the session here. This was pretty much everything I wanted to cover as well. So we're in good shape anyway. There was one or two other things I will probably put into a short part 2 video, but this should be enough to at least get you going on OCA and know your way around the interface, know how to save files, save them locally, delegate them, build configurations, add to the configurations, manipulate things inside and outside of racks, and add standalone components through the ad hoc containers. So I hope that was useful. Keep your eyes out for a short part 2 where I'll touch upon a few topics, minor topics that we didn't go over in this session. Thank you much for your time.